It's
I
crazy.
believe it completely because I think part of it is that just like all that cutting and pasting we were doing, back in the day, now our attention span and things is so fragmented, just being cutted and pasted into all the time, right? I actually just made a note for myself earlier that I've always been good about not doing this, but earlier while I was writing, I found I checked my phone like 2 or 3 times, like over a fairly short pan. And I always, like, my family gets annoyed because I'm notorious for like losing my phone places because I just kind of forget about it. And I'm fine with that. Like, I like to forget about it, but I was like, oh, I don't need like to check this phone. Like, it doesn't need, and usually what I do is I just silence it and kind of put it somewhere, which also annoys my family. But I need just to like focus here, and so I think if you were of a time that didn't have so much things competing for your attention, and then also trying to brain hack you based on human psychology that's been learned over all these years, hack your brain to get you to buy this and get you to pay attention to this for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds, that, maybe it's now it takes us more editing because we're being edited all the time versus back in the day with Byron and some people that there wasn't so much just attention suck, just absorption everywhere you walk. Like I joke when you walk into Beverly Hills, money just starts siphoning out of your pocket. It just like goes and you're like $3,000 like poorer by the time you've walked down the block. And I feel like attention span, that's everywhere you go. It's just that everywhere you go is just vying for your attention. Not even just online, just as you drive, as you do anything. Writers, readers, drinkers, lend me your ears and your livers. Welcome to Writers Drinking Whiskey Open Bar, the show where the stories may be short, but the pours are always heavy. I'm your host, William R. Hensey, and I'm really delighted and honored today to have another wonderful cast with us. So let's get to meeting everyone. And as is my wont, I like to have a little fun with the introductions here. So I thought we could go around. I will introduce everyone with my fancy monikers I've been putting together. You should see how long this list is now, by the way. And what I was going to ask today is just, what is your most unhinged writing advice? So, well, we can go around to the I like unhinged things, as if you can't tell by the intro here. That's also my want as we speak about wants. But so let's start with Diane Hammond, the only author to ever give Free Willy a high five. Diane, what is your most unhinged writing advice?
That's a tough one. All right, my most unhinged would probably be, think about the oldest person you know and just start to describe them and then expand from there. See where you go with one of their worst qualities, one of their worst traits, or best, up to you. But
sure.
Just treat them as a character and plop them down in a setting and have somebody walk in the door and meet them and get going.
Yeah, very good. Why the oldest person?
Because they're usually kooky. I mean, I don't know too many old, grandparently old, who
sure.
have many filters. So given that they tend to be less filtered and more opinionated and more likely to do things that are a little off the wall intentionally or through dementia, you've got lots of
depending on who you're describing.
I speak from experience. You quickly have no idea what you're talking about, but it's really fun to follow that road and see where you end.
Sure. That's great advice. Thank you for that. Austin, you want to take? Oh wait, let me make sure I get the moniker in here. I almost just said the name. So Austin Camacho, the godfather of creatures, crime, and creativity. What is your most unhinged writing advice?
Wow. And I had time to think about it. I'm impressed that Diane had something right off the top of her. I guess my most unhinged writing advice would be to learn from and pattern your work after people who write in other genre. If you're writing a mystery, go ahead and write it like it's a science fiction story and see how that comes out. So that's what I got.
Cool. That's
I think that's really cool. You see actually a lot of I have never read it, but I've heard lots about romantasy, right? With romance and fantasy. But
Yes.
I mean, so that's, in that whole genre. I think it's like the number, well, last I heard, which was a couple months ago, but I think the top 2, 3 books on the bestseller list, I think it was the Los Angeles Times. So maybe West Coast based, but and maybe we're into our romantasy and La La Land here, but think that's how you would come up with that stuff. So I think that's a wonderful suggestion.
Yeah.
And then Jesse Darnay, the man whose prose paints the river green with envy. What is your most unhinged writing advice?
You live up to that. I think
It was a St. Patrick's Day one, but I like it so much. Actually, Austin's I had a St. Patrick's Day. I was like, oh, I got to mix it up. But I was like, no, I like Jesse's St. Patrick's Day one. That's going to be the long-term one here.
I think, at least once take a notebook and go write somewhere absolutely out of the box. I mean, like the visiting room in a sanitarium or, a train tearing through the European countryside, or just wherever you can that is completely out of the box. Grab a notebook, a pencil, sit down, and write there at least once.
Very cool. Very cool. That's actually fun. I actually love mixing it up. Right, kind of getting out like other places, especially like you're writing, have a routine. I write basically every morning, but occasionally it's nice just to get out and write on some paper, write on just a different medium, a different place to kind of to stir up those creative juices. So I think that's really really cool advice. So thank you for that. So let's then get to the topic at hand today. So we're going to talk the short story. Generally here, and I thought maybe where we could start is kind of one, what is the state of the short story, right? Like I know there's all writing in some degrees feels like it's in flux, all books in flux with the AI kind of download of content, and then the Amazonification of it, and serial fiction, all these things going on. But what's the state of the short story? And kind of what makes it vital still, or maybe doesn't, if you disagree with the vital statement. So, in no particular order. So anyone wants to jump in, jump in, and we'll get to chatting.
Well, I'll say it's strange that this is the topic because I've been reading a Norton anthology of short fiction. I don't know if you can really see that. And it's a mix of, very obviously iconic, famous writers and contemporary writers I've never heard of. It's all short stories.
Oh, okay.
And it really gives you kind of a wide range. But so that's kind of where my mind is now in terms of short stories. And these are all, well, they're all high quality. Some of them I connect with and some of them I don't.
Sure.
But in terms of where they are now, I don't know. It kind of seems like, I guess I want to say that, it's, never going to be as good as this again, because I think like even the oldest short story in here is, or even the newest short story in here is like early 90s.
Mhm.
But I don't know. I don't read enough short stories these days. I mean, I check out different literary journals and I see some of the things that are coming out. And again, that too is just such a wide range of voices. I don't see a lot of voice-driven short stories these days. Doesn't mean they're not there, but I just haven't seen as much. Whereas if you go back in time, it seems like that was more of the trend, and that's what I connect with, really. Yeah. Like I like interesting voices leading me through the story.
Yeah. I kind of cut my teeth on short fiction. I believe that that's the best way to learn the craft. Because you don't set out to write a novel, you have a shorter body of work to work with, you get through it more quickly, and it's totally unsparing. You can't make any stupid mistakes because there's no room. So that said, I'm of an age where I learned really everything I know about short fiction from the New Yorker in the 80s, 90s. And that was Raymond Carver and Ann Beattie and Laurie Colwin. And they were wonderful to learn from because they were so in the moment. Everything was right there in the present, and they did fabulous dialogue. And I used to live for the New Yorker, coming in every week. And now probably showing my lack of development, I can't get through a lot of it. It just seems aimless, and it's not that it's not plotted. That I don't mind things that have no particular trajectory or plot, but there's just something kind of unfocused, or it's not
sometimes it
moving.
feels yeah, sometimes it feels like there's no stakes to it. Right?
Right,
It's just people wandering around, but you don't know why you're supposed to care. There's no
right,
stakes or something to kind of put you in, like even just minor stakes, right? Everything doesn't have to be murder, but they
no,
might be
but
embarrassed. They might be, they want this job. What you just have no idea. It's just,
right.
kind of wandering the suburbs. Kind
I
of
can
like,
leave a short story in the New Yorker right now in the middle, or sooner, which is a terrible sign. I mean, it's the style isn't beautiful or interesting. I don't know. I'm just not connecting with it, and I hate that word because that's what
Mm.
agents and editors say when they reject your stuff. I'm just not connecting with the material. But it's true
right.
that it doesn't pull me in
Sure.
for whatever reason. So I miss the 80s and 90s when so much was being tried and developed, and
Yeah.
that's
I
my
think
feeling.
as a genre writer to my heart,
Hmm.
to me, if there isn't a serious conflict, then it's not a story. Now you're just telling me how your day went, basically.
Sure.
If I don't very quickly see a real problem that somebody is trying to solve, or a real conflict that somebody is trying to resolve, I lose interest.
I
And
agree.
for me, the real problem with the short story today, as opposed to back in the day, in the 80s or before that, is there are so few markets.
Yes.
So
Oh,
you can't. There was a time when you could cut your teeth just writing short stories, and you just did that for a while, for a
yeah.
few years. You can't now, because you're happy if you place one or two in a year.
Yeah.
So that kind of weakens it. I'll be honest with you. The only time I write short stories is for an anthology that has a theme. The
Mhm.
theme kicks off an idea, and I can write a story from that. But I don't have it to just sit down out of nowhere and say, well, I'm going to write, create a story. I don't have that skill. I envy you that you were able to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a shame. And um, the lack of a market, I think, is part of it. I mean,
Well,
you
yeah.
write a beautiful story. The New Yorker publishes how many? One a week for the year. So out of the
Yeah.
tens of thousands they get, even if yours is brilliant, that's not the market. I mean, that's so, but
Right.
there's
I got a nice rejection from the New Yorker one time, like an actual personalized one where they mentioned a few elements, and I was like, "Oh, that felt like success, right?" Like, "Oh my gosh, they actually took a minute to like compliment me and kind of, we don't have space, but we really like this and that, and please submit again." I was like, "Oh my gosh, usually you're expecting
That's awesome.
silence, right?" And
Can I devolve for a second into a New Yorker story? I'm
sure,
befriended because I grew up in New York and lived in DC. I got to meet one of the New Yorker editors, and I revered the New Yorker, especially in those decades. And he always he critiqued my stories, which was amazing. They never bought any.
uh-huh.
He was a really good teacher, and I went to see him. God knows why he let me. I was in my 20s and absolutely sick with fandom, I guess. Anyway,
Uh-huh.
we talked a little bit about writing and young writers, and he said, to be honest with you, I tell an awful lot of people to take up woodworking. And I said, what? He said, really spare us, because these are people who just shouldn't be writing. They're never going to get there, and it's a waste of our time. It's a waste of their time. Take up woodworking. Do something else. I thought, oh my God, he didn't tell me to take up woodworking, and that was good news. But
Uh-huh.
those were the years when they were pretty much the champion of short fiction,
Yes.
cutting edge stuff, as well as Kenyon Review and some of the phenomenal literary journals. And
Sure. Well, the
to hear
Atlantic
him,
used to have some really great
yes,
ones. There was,
yep,
I
yep,
think that I actually, disagree that there's no markets. I actually think that there's more. There's just the paying markets
Okay.
have gone to almost nothing. But you
Yeah.
can, if you want to publish something, there's an e-zine, out there, for you, most
Oh,
likely going on,
yeah,
Yeah.
and
right.
most likely it's going to be defunct in 6 to 12 months, and then a new one will pick up. And some of them will stay around, but the money, right? Like we know
Yeah.
the name Raymond Carver from short stories.
Yes.
Like, I mean, Edgar Allan Poe, really short stories, but
Yes.
that's, further
Yes.
back in time. But Raymond Carver, a little more contemporary, was a short story writer that we remember to this day that, got known for writing short stories. And I don't know I can't think of a single person today and I love, I mean, the book I usually kind of put behind me here is my short story anthology. And I still consider myself a short story writer first, but it is, what are you going to do with it? I mean, you sell them, I think I probably made at the time, because I started 2005, I think was the first story I had published. I probably made $150 off of the stories, like when I was sending them out, like all totaled, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was like, $50. I was like, cool, score. I'm going to Taco Bell now or whatever.
Well, the early days, my early days, there was still Mademoiselle and Glamour and some of the women's magazines. I sold a piece to Mademoiselle. I don't even remember what it was about anymore, but I got paid about $1,000. It doesn't exist anymore. Woman's World is another one. They're not terribly challenging.
yeah.
They pay
At
up.
one time, all of the major magazines carried short stories, and I think for my kind of stuff, the big paying markets at that time were like Playboy,
Yes.
Men's Journal,
Mhm.
things like that, and you could write a little adventure thing and make some money, and a lot of people saw your name.
Yeah.
Like if you got a story in Mademoiselle, a lot of people saw your name.
Yeah.
And
And
that's what I meant by the markets there are so few markets where you can establish kind of a career. You know what I mean?
Well, you think
Sure.
about Scott Fitzgerald and some of the other 20s, 30s writers, and they made a living at it. That's how they supported themselves. And their novels were kind of, did well, hopefully, but the short fiction is what kept food on the table. And that's sure a different world than we live in. I hope that changes again. I really do. That there's, for writers' sake, if not readers. And it's true, there are a lot of websites and things where you can get things appearing, but in terms of making any money at it, they tend to, well, I'm saying this, I'm not sure I'm right, but I think they tend to be much more genre specific. In the market
Most
for
of them, I
literary
think, are.
fiction.
Probably.
Yeah.
I definitely want to echo what Diane's saying about the New Yorker. I'm actually reading not short stories, but I'm reading a collection they put together of just all their best poetry from 1925 to now, 100 years. And so I'm seeing it side by side, things that they published in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and then things that they published recently, right? And there's such a difference.
Yeah.
And it's not just like, oh, it's contemporary times, and these were there's such, in my opinion, there's such a lack of like heart and passion that was so completely there in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know, but when you were saying that about short stories, I was like, I'm seeing the exact same thing from that publication with poetry. I don't know what's changed, but it's, it has changed a lot.
Yeah, a lot of, and again, the New Yorker is not the be all and end all. It's just what I tend to read the most, but they have a lot of international writers now and translated stories, and it's neither good nor bad, but it's changed the kind of flavor of fiction to an extent. But I don't know why, Al. It's
very weird.
If I could throw out a theory, and then you guys can either say, hey, or you can say, you're not. But I think that in today's world, there are a lot of people who take classes and go to universities and study and are taught how to write a story or how to write poetry.
Right.
In the earlier part of my life, everybody I knew who was a writer learned how to write by reading a bunch of stuff.
Mhm.
We just
Right.
read a lot,
Yeah.
and the poets that I knew read voluminously of poetry, all kinds of poetry, and then I guess they kind of, synthesized
Synthesize.
it into their own. We learned by reading the masters,
Yeah.
and I think you get a very different product if you learn by somebody giving you a series of rules, and if you're going to write a story, then it's got to do this, 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 and this.
Sure.
Do you think
Well,
that
and I think so much has devolved into house style. It's just been almost this gentrification of writing.
Yes,
It's like it's
there's
supposed
that
to look
too.
like this, supposed to look like this, supposed to look like this. And so you get the MFA students
That's-
who I've had on the show and love dearly. But though I've even had a few admitted on the show, is that there's a tendency that if you're in the MFA, well, you need to pass. So you need to please your teacher. You become a professor one day, and it's just professors writing stories to other professors, and it's like the audience is kind of out of the equation. The audience is only
Right.
professors and not a general reading public anymore. And I think that's kind of exactly what's happened to kind of literary fiction in a lot of ways. It's become,
Yeah.
professors writing to professors. They expect it to kind of look and sound a certain way. And the ability to, you have more in some ways ability than ever before to be bold and out there, because you could put it on Amazon or you can serialize it and things, but there's so much noise. It's so difficult to get any kind of visibility with it that, be as bold as you want, but if you actually want to make some money,
right.
you
So-
can't. You got to gentrify it down to the
Exactly.
style. But
So here's the question. I'm a literary fiction writer. I don't have the ability to write sci-fi or any other genre. I'm just limited that way. But do you think that genre short fiction has a greater chance of reaching an audience than New Yorker style literary kind of, for I can't think of a good word for it, a more literate public that's shrinking? I mean, is so
I don't. It's funny. I should mention up front though. I had John DiSavino. He's has a wonderful podcast called Short Story Today. And then every week he interviews a short story writer and then reads one of their works. And he's actually not a writer. He's a voice actor and like director and things. So it's like an audiobook quality version. And he came on the show. I went on his. So it was really fun. He's a super great guy. But he would say that there's more great story writers today than ever before. It's just so much more difficult to find them. And I think even with like genre, like if you could go on Amazon and sell a short story for $3 a pop, right? You could actually probably make decent money. But people are selling their novels for $3 a pop, or people just pay for the KDP. And it's like, well, if they buy your short story for $3, and they're like, well, this guy, I got 300 pages or whatever of content. You've shorted me, And I always I have no qualms about any, and I write all of them. I have no qualms about any of them. But there's this notion that longer is worth more. And I always think of it like, you might have a novel that is just as like great written as a poem, but I tend to think like poem is the condensed, like ultimate kind of language version, and then short stories and maybe novellas. I mean, you can keep parsing it, but moving out to a novel versus, so that poem is just as worthy as that novel is. And I've known poets I've tried, it's taken me 5 years to write that poem and things, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, but I think the paying customer looks at it like, well, I got so less. Like I got my macchiato and it's the 1 ounce, thing. It's the European style. It's like, no, I wanted the American 32 ounce, macchiato. So
the challenge of competing in a marketplace where people can download a package of 10 albums for 10 novels for $2.99, knowing that they probably won't want to read them all. But for $2.99, if I find one that I really liked, I feel like I'm ahead.
right. Right.
No, but I think
Yeah.
that's a good point, and I think there's probably something to be said for that. Like we're going back to, Diane was talking about stories in the New Yorker in the 80s and the 90s. Like there was more of an audience because there wasn't as much tech, there weren't as many avenues to create all these niches. Like more people focused on
Yeah,
those stories, right?
Right.
I would
Versus
absolutely
now,
agree.
like, yeah.
I mean, that's what Bill's. I think that's what you mean when you say there's so much more noise now. Um,
Yes.
Hmm.
and
Yes.
So
and
it's
yet,
not as like it doesn't have as much meaning and value to people as it used
right,
to, right? Like
Well,
a lot of
that
people
was
used to pick up the New Yorker a lot and like collectively read the story, and it would be something you would wait for each week and get excited about, and then you could even probably talk to other people who read the New Yorker about like that kind
right.
of reach. It just isn't there anymore, right?
no,
So
Yeah.
it's yeah, as you were saying, Austin, like, oh, 3.99, I can buy a pack of novels. So then it
Yeah.
loses like that meaning. It's just another product.
and yet the funny thing is, from a more writerly academic standpoint, I think short stories are way harder to write than novels. What you were saying, Jesse, about the relative value or worth of a poem versus a novel or
Sure.
whatever. I think short stories are the toughest. I'm not a poet, so I leave poetry out because I don't understand it very well. But fiction wise, I think short fiction is by far the most punishing
Why do you think that?
because you don't have the room to fuck around.
Yeah, yeah.
You,
You say that on the show?
you
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
in novels, I mean, I have characters that really don't move the story forward. I love them. I leave them in because I
Hmm.
love them, and my editor lets me get away with it. But you can't do that in a short story. You've got to be every word, every detail counts so much more because it's like
Yeah.
bouncing a quarter off a well-made bed. I mean, you just don't have the room
You
to.
know what else? You can start writing a novel with a vague idea of what you
Yeah,
want it to do, and you can write 40,000 words before you figure out what this thing is about. But with a
Hmm.
short story, you have to know before you type that first letter, you have to know, what am I trying to say here?
yeah, yeah. You don't have that freedom. I know. It's true.
Well,
Exactly.
and you have to find the it was I think it was Poe that actually talked about the singular effect, on the reader, right? Every short story should have a singular effect. And it's funny, one of the stories in that anthology it's called Teeth. It's 1,000 words published. Well, the first time I wrote it, it was 12,000 words. And but I didn't, it was
Wow.
like I was writing a novel. But it wasn't there. And I came back to it, later, however the chronology goes, so, maybe a year later. And I was like, no, the story is just these 1,000 words. I edited it down a lot from there, but I'm like, this is actually the story. This is the short story here. And
Right.
then the novel I'm working on now, that is chapter one. And it's not anywhere near that 12,000 words, so it is like condensing it. To give it a whiskey metaphor, an old fashioned, if done properly, and bartenders, you should always do it properly. It's whiskey. It's usually a bourbon or a rye. It should be a bourbon or a rye. Some bitters, maybe a little simple syrup, a bourbon cherry, and then a lemon or not a lemon twist, an orange twist, preferably. You could do a lemon. I wouldn't say you did it wrong. It's very simple ingredients, but if you
Yes.
get any of that out of whack, it is not good. So it's actually like my wife knows, the lovely Claire knows, we go somewhere. If I order an old fashioned, the next drink I get's a Manhattan, she goes, "Oh, you didn't like it?" I'm like, "Yeah, but the Manhattan it's sweet vermouth you add to it. So no matter
Yes.
what bourbon you put in, you add some sweet vermouth. That sweet vermouth is covering up whatever that flavor was, and Manhattans, you can usually get a decent one. It's not bad. You get lots of bad old fashions or you get great ones. And I think that's kind of the poem or the short story you start getting down. It's you don't have all of the extra, like in a novel, you can make the coffee with all the milks and the
Yeah.
creamers and everything else.
Yeah.
And, and people are kind of expecting that and they're wanting it. But the short story, you do that, they're like, no, this is garbage. What did you
Right.
just give me?
Right.
This isn't an old fashioned. You made something else.
Well, one of the editor, Daniel Menaker at the New Yorker, who used to critique my stuff, I was very much an imitator at the time of Ann Beattie and some of the other greats. And he finally returned one of my stories and said, "This is so quotidian. Nothing happens." quotidian. I'd never even heard that word. He was right. It was so in the moment that nothing happened. It was,
Wow.
and I thought, okay, so there's a difference between being in the moment and getting the dialogue crisp and actually having a point. I had everything but the point. So, I would have failed.
That's actually a really good point. I mean, so in thinking about, because I have this book now with me that we're talking about this, and thinking about all these short stories I've read, the one thing that 90% of them have in common, it's really, they're all about one thing happening, like one
Yes.
event. They're all written in different ways. I mean, famous writers, Carver, like different styles, etc. But it's all like this particular thing happened, and these are the events surrounding this thing, and this is how this thing wrapped up. It's like it's focusing in on like a major event or a major,
Right.
all of them. Like, so it's very interesting
Yeah.
how tight that is.
Well, it's like Carver's cathedrals, right? Where it's like,
Yeah, that's one of them. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems simple enough, but then there's like, it's like it's so trite to say this, but I'm going to go ahead and say it probably for the first time ever on this show. It's kind of like it hits at something about what it means to be human, And I think people think that means anything, right? But no, it's like, oh, it's a deeper, like it's that something that like you don't just say like, oh yeah, it means to be human. It means to love someone. Sure. But how do you actually show that? How do you make someone actually feel that?
Well, since I recently read the story, I can say that one of the things he does is he sets it up. He sets these characters. He's so good at like rendering these characters, especially the one, whatever the protagonist, the one who's like prejudiced against blind people and doesn't want the blind man to come over. He's so good at like making you understand this person and kind of like hate this person for being as ignorant as he is. And then you see this blind man who's not necessarily like this completely sympathetic character, but like can't help the fact that he's blind, and you empathize with them. And then like they're just kind of butting heads. And then this crazy thing happen. He has this crazy thing happen at the end where like one starts guiding the other's hand and like makes him close his eyes so they can like imagine a picture together, right? So it's like these this event that these two characters who are so opposite and so like at odds. He makes it so that by a certain twist of events, like they're brought together in that kind of way, and you can't help but feel like, hey, like we're all human. Like I'm just losing my train of thought. Like
we can all be the bad guy and the good guy too.
Exactly.
Times,
Thank you.
right? I mean, yeah,
Exactly.
you can do it. I see that, and actually, there's character growth in it, right? A short story might be 1,000 words, it might be 10, but you want to actually see the character here and be somewhere else at the end.
And I'd say growth or revelation. I think there's reader growth for some good stories. It's the character stays the same, but it's like peeling an onion, and through whatever action is in the story or conflict, you learn more and more about that character who seemed quite clear and simple in the beginning. And of course, if it's well done, they're nothing like what your initial expectation was.
That's the biggest weakness I see in stories that I read, at least the more recently written stories, is that some momentous event does happen, but it doesn't appear to have affected the characters at all. It hasn't changed them, which misses the whole point of a story to me.
Sure. Right.
So, Austin, I assume that short stories are partly your portfolio. So if I'm right about that, when you start a short story, not do you know everything? Nobody knows everything until they've written it. But do you have a very clear idea before you start?
Yes, I am. I'm a very outliney, plot-driven kind of a writer.
I so envy you.
So I always, before I actually compose anything, I know here's what happened, and here's how these people, here's who they were at the beginning, and here's who they were at the end, and that's where I'm going. There's my trajectory.
Oh.
I don't know how to do it any other way, but you write what you want to read.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to read. I want to get to the end of that story, and it's like I'm trying to pull an old classic example, and my brain A Christmas Carol.
Uh-huh.
A Christmas Carol is a perfectly composed short story in which the events happen and you see this guy was this guy at the beginning, but now because of all of this, now he's that guy. And I mean that's the pattern for every story should somehow or other follow that.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, there's perfect symmetry to that story too.
Yes.
I mean, you could
Yes.
drop it. It's a good example. I do envy you. I don't know, Jesse, if you're a natural short story writer or
I'm a
not.
consummate pantser
Uh,
and
Wow.
also mostly a poet. So
And I envy you.
I'm lost in images and I just kind of sort through whatever comes out and then keep shaping it until I'm satisfied with whatever shape that is.
that's like sculpture,
It
reductive.
really is for me. It's yeah. And I'm like, I mean, I've been committed to two long-term fiction projects, but more and more I'm thinking after those I should probably just focus on poetry. Like I really have that kind of mind.
Don't you
Uh,
think I'm eclipsing things here, Bill, and I forgive me for it, but do you think that, for instance, I'm not a good short story writer. In fact, I would say I can't write a decent short story. I need to mess around to figure out what I'm writing. But do you feel like there are natural um, medium, but also links that each of us write to? Like Bill, I know you're a prolific short story writer, or at least at one time you were. I don't know if that's still true. And Austin, I don't know which I'll ask you, which is your preferred length, a novel, short stories?
Well, I'm much more comfortable writing a novel. Much more. I like to really explore who these people are and why they're doing what they're doing and what they think of each other and all that stuff all that stuff. But I'm a genre guy. I live in a universe of good guys and bad guys.
Hmm.
And the mystery story, novel or short story, is really all about human motivation.
Yeah.
What was the motive? Why would you do that? And that's the fun to me, exploring that. So yeah, novels is my fun space.
Love that.
Hmm. Sure. Well, I do think people have a natural, or maybe Austin, you hit the word perfectly. Maybe just comfortable kind
Yeah.
of pace. You know what I mean? Like so it's funny because stories usually come to me as somewhat of a whole, right? There's a story, especially a short story, will kind of come to me. I may
Yeah.
not know at the ending, I may not even know the very beginning, but I know there's this and there's this thing I want to get out. And then, to Jesse's point, I've always said, like, I always think of it like sculpting, but it's like, okay, I need to get materials, I need to get this, and then you're shaping. That's why that story Teeth it's long, and I'm like, that's not it. The shape is completely
Right.
wrong. And then I got it, and then later on, I was like, "Oh, there's more, more to this to kind of explore and play around with." But I think what I love about short stories, with that being kind of the way I write, is for one, you can actually glimpse the shape at one sitting, right? Like a novel or like Pirates of Appalachia, which is like 220,000 words long, right? It's like I have it in my head, but it's almost like you have to glimpse this part and then kind of glimpse this part and kind of work them together, like the panoramic shot that you
Right.
take a bunch of pictures and work them in, versus the story that you can kind of look at it. And I really love the language, So there's the
Yes.
poetry, the short story that you can really. I try to do it with my novels too, but I have to be a little more judicious about how creative I am with the language or even just the form. I think short stories, what I think is missing from today's short stories is just experimentation. Like to me, I love experimental short stories because you're in and out. When like James Joyce, I love his short stories. His novels, I struggle with because it's a little too much. And I have Finnegan's Wake. I'm lost. I'm not
Yes.
sure. It's a little too much experimentation, but I think it does, I think it depends on the person. I think you could Diane, I think you absolutely could write a good short story. I mean, if you have the idea and you really wanted to, I think it's a craft thing at some point, right? Like if
Yeah.
you have the craft, it's now you got to learn this kind of part. But I think if you're like, oh, I really want to write a short story, and you got the anthology Jesse's reading over there, and kind of really did it.
No, I was just
And
looking
the
for there's an experimental author that I think you would really like if you like it. Well, Jorge Luis Borges, of course, but there's another one. I'll find it. But
And,
anyway, yeah, there's some really good experimental short story writers.
I have started a short story in the last couple of weeks because I don't have anything else to do. And I think maybe I can do
Must
it
be
now.
nice.
Yeah, it's always relative.
That's fair.
It's sticky, and so my reasons are bad. But I agree that I have the nub of something. I know the story because it's based on something that I witnessed. So it's not like when I begin a novel, I know where I'm beginning, I know where I'm ending. God knows what's going to happen in the middle because I'm a pantser too. But with this thing that I'm going to try to pull off, I do actually know what the story is that I'm going to tell. And I think there's hope. I don't know that it'll be a good story, but I think I can bring it home. So that's my challenge for right now, is to see if I can rejoin the world of short type fiction and learn from it, since I haven't in years and years and years. So we'll see if I pull it off or not.
Right. Well, I'm sure you could. I think what happens sometimes, though, and actually maybe this is a nice transition because we can start talking about kind of writing techniques for a short story versus maybe a novel, not necessarily just verses, but just generally. But I think one of the things that there's the 3-draft kind of thing that's taught in schools and stuff, right? First draft, second draft, and the third draft you clean it up, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's perfectly solid. I generally do that. I probably take some liberties here or there with how I go about doing it, but I think that's a really solid, tried and true process. I think sometimes with poetry and short stories, lumping them into the shorter forms or flash fiction, which is fairly popular nowadays, is you have to almost think of it like this could be a 10-draft story. Right, you might have to come back to it later. Like I think Dario had told me that when I had told him the story of Teeth, he was like, oh, you know what? You didn't edit that. You distilled that down. From 12,000 words to 1,000 or whatever. It's like it's a distillation process.
Okay.
Which probably for that one was true, but I think sometimes that's what it takes, and sometimes it'll come out and you have it all together. But I think sometimes you have to. And it's shorter, so it's probably less work than if you try to do that with a novel, 10 drafts, 11 drafts. Well, you never publish the thing, right? Or you never get it out. It's now you're spending crazy amounts of time for a normal sized book. But for a short story, I think you absolutely can. You can think of it, poems and things. You can think of it as something that, I have an idea for a sentence, and that sentence may make such an oversized impact in that shorter work than it would for a novel. Novel it might, but it is going to get lost with the other 100,000 words, right? Yeah. I mean, there's only so much. They're diluted potentially just with the amount of words in the book.
Julio Cortázar, Cortazar. You should check him out.
Okay.
Well, if you like the experimental,
sure.
He does it. He has this great story where it's basically like he's describing a guy going to work and reading a book, and then like he starts describing all the events that are happening in the book, and you're like really lost in the story of the book. And then like the conclusion of the book is these people coming and like finding this guy who's reading the book in his office, coming to kill him. Like he just goes in and out and brings it back, like the two worlds together at the end.
Wow.
Yeah, he's great.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'll check him out. Yeah. I love experimental work. It's always fun.
Worse?
Oh,
I'm not sure.
What?
That's not me. I don't think.
I don't think it's
there's something about arthritis pain.
Nope.
Then that's me.
relate to that.
My computer hiccup.
Okay. No worries.
I can relate.
So moving over to the to the technique. So we've talked about character right? With kind of focusing things on character. Not that again, I'm not trying to prescribe anything for anyone watching. It's just ideas to kind of think about, but character focus, and then also having, I think. I'm not sure who first said this, but T.D. Johnston's been T.D. Johnston, Tim Johnston, who's been on the show, has been on some of these open bars. So I always kind of forget who's been on with who because he pops in here or there. But he runs the Short Story America anthology, and he always talks about being early conflict. There has to be a situation rife with early conflict because you need to know what the stakes are, what the conflict is, kind of early to be able to kind of follow along. Anything else like when you're thinking about writing a short story, or like the one you're writing right now, Diane, or just even with like the poetry and things, although conflict may or may not, affect the poetry. What are some of the techniques, or what are some of the bigger picture kind of things you think about as you go about crafting the story?
One of the things that I'm wrestling with right now is the story is about feelings. It's about a man with a desperately handicapped child, and his wife wanted the baby. They knew that it was going to be in serious trouble all its life, and the man didn't want it. And he's reflecting basically on this child happened to live a lot longer than it was expected to, and his entire life was derailed because everything is revolving around this child. And he's watching a young woman out the window who commutes to work every day and thinking, what would it be like to start over without a child like this? What would my life have been like? And so it's a very reflective, contemplative kind of, not much happens except in his working through what he really feels and would he really choose to do it differently. So the challenge there, I think, craft-wise, is to make it interesting enough, have enough activity, things moving, parts, when it's a very solitary, quiet story. So how you write about a feeling or a very complicated set of feelings and get from beginning to, not resolution because it isn't resolvable, but how do you make peace with a complicated set of feelings?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, I think you can move a lot without moving, right? And not to be obtuse, but you can have an epiphany or something that changes your life in a very quiet way. So I think, I don't know that, there needs to be lots of physical movement, necessarily, as long as there's mental, emotional movement that the reader can follow along with.
But how do you write about that in a way that isn't one long continuous interior monologue? At what point it's a matter of reductive, how much thinking do you want to show versus how much you suggest and have the reader go, well, yeah. Anyway, it's challenging, and it's a different kind of craft issue, I guess, to me, than staging some scene. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, I think there's also like the, especially with short stories, but I think all stories, just the power of the unsaid. Like, what are the things that are left
There you
out?
go. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's when you can really nail it. I think the truly great writers kind of nail that. They don't have to, put it in parentheses for you what the point is or what's just happened. They make you feel that thing, or what that character is going through. So it's interesting. It's always interesting challenges. That's what I like about writing in generally, but short stories. A lot of times I just give myself a challenge, and it's like, the floor is lava. How do you get across the living room, right? Like it's this like primal, like little human things we do, right? Like, oh, here's this challenge. Oh, now you have to figure out a way. And I think it's really fun artistically to do that. Like, oh, here's the short story. I want to do this. How do you figure it out? Yeah, exactly.
Austin, you've got advice for me, I think.
I'm trying to wrap my head around what it is that you're actually trying to do. I imagine in my own head, suppose I wanted to write that story. Well, the action would be all of the things that this guy has to do every day for the handicapped child.
Right.
And I guess he would be, if I wasn't doing this right now, what would I be doing?
Mhm.
Or what if I just didn't do this? And one of the themes that I like to explore in my novels, I suppose in my short stories, is the basic idea that doing the right thing actually means doing the hard thing.
Yeah.
It always means doing the hard thing.
Mhm.
And what if you
So,
have a character who doesn't want to do the right thing?
and well, that's your story. Your story is
Yep.
I continue to do the right thing, but I'm not getting anything out of this.
Yeah. I don't want to
Well,
Where's
anymore.
where's my
and
reward
sometimes
for
the
doing the
character,
right thing?
yeah. Well, and
And
sometimes it's interesting to have the character do the wrong thing.
Mhm.
Because I think your point earlier, Diane, was like the revelation for the reader, right? Like sometimes seeing a character do the exact wrong thing
Mhm.
can impart something more on the reader than just seeing them make the right choice at the
Right.
end.
Right.
It can be that punch in the gut to where it's like, oh shit, like this guy, I
Yeah,
don't whatever,
yeah.
left the kid and then went out,
Yeah.
drinking or whatever, right? And they're like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And then that can be like, oh my God, okay, am I actually taking care of my kids, right? So I think
Right.
that's.
Interesting. I mean, it'll be a story about longing, and I don't. We'll see. If I manage to actually write it, I'll let you guys read it.
Please do.
It's
The,
a good challenge, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't
the
know.
question is, will he ultimately decide that what he's been doing was in fact the right way to go? Or
No,
will he ultimately decide that this was all a mistake?
I think so.
Or
And what do
something
you
in
do with
between.
that? What do you do
Mhm.
with that?
Yeah.
Knowing it's not the way you're supposed to feel. His
What
wife
do you
doesn't
do
feel
with
that way. Hmm?
it? Wow.
Anyway, I'm getting you guys all pulled
No,
away.
it's something to think about. I like puzzling over other writers' problems. It's
Yeah.
good.
So Jesse, so when you were talking about looking for the shape of things, what's the
Yeah, okay.
what I
So
mean?
here,
Like,
let me share my screen and I'll show you, I think, because I'm a teacher, so I think it's easier to look at an example. I'm sending you a request. Okay. So this is just a snippet from something I'm working on right now. Um, and so this guy comes into it's this kid and he's at the gym and he is really upset because he had this fling with another guy who's completely like ghosting him, and at the same time he coincidentally bumps into his misogynist uncle,
Hmm.
um, and then tries to like blow him off and goes to the treadmills and then decides he can't run, he's out of shape, so he goes to the spa and then he starts flirting with this guy in the spa and he's happy, and then sure enough uncle comes in. So he says, Boyo, Nolan said, plopping onto a bench seat. What do you come here for, the spa? He guffawed. Someone in a corner side-eyed him, stood. He ambled out. Another followed. Nolan rested his elbows on the seat above. He picked ketchup crust off his shoulder and farted. A smothered boom. What you doing for work these days? He said to me. Fulfillment. I clenched my fist. Greeting card company.
Hmm.
The Camelback man, says the guy he's flirting with because he has a Camelback bottle and he doesn't know his name. Shut his eyes, leaning to one side, knees up, head lolled. Another tattoo dotted his right ankle, a stray sparrow in a scent. Marie has the Hallmark Channel on over Christmas, Nolan said. It's nice. So, and this is nowhere near like even close to done, but like what I do is I just try to imagine these people in this situation, um, and I just write it really first, without any intention of like having it as a complete story or like following any kind of arc, and then it's always off when I first write it, the way I
Mhm.
think it would happen. And so what I do is I write it and I read it and I'm like, no, that's not it. And then I imagine it again, and then I write it again as no, that's not it. And I write it again and I write it again. And then eventually, slowly, like, and I'm sure this will happen like 5 or 10 more times with this. Um, it starts to be that the characters are doing things that feel very real and resonant to me. And that's when I know that that moment or that page is done for now. And so when I have something that's like complete and done in that sense, then I can kind of take a step back and look at the thing in as a whole and start thinking about those things that Austin was talking about, right? Like, how
Hey
is this
Jesse,
moving from point A to point B?
not
What
to
is the
interrupt you.
conflict?
Were you done sharing it? Because if not, I'll put it just back on so we
Oh
can see
no,
your
yeah, yeah,
lovely
sorry.
face as we go. Okay.
I just thought it was better to look at
There you
it
go.
as an example.
No, for sure.
So that's me. Like it's just it doesn't work for me unless
Hmm.
uh it begins as something that I really think would happen in a real way that resonates with me. But from there, once I have that, that to me is the material that
Right.
I can then put in the form that I think it should be in. If that
Yeah, the
makes
lump
sense.
of clay, the lump of
Yeah,
clay that you sculpt.
yeah, yeah.
Sure.
Sometimes that's
Well,
the
it's like
hard
you
part.
hear like woodworkers do that, right? It's like, oh, I have this, I'm going to do it, but then you kind of hit something in there, or like
Yeah,
marble or something, right? You hit a vein. You're like, oh, this looks really interesting, or that didn't work out. You have to kind of,
Wow.
to
exactly. But
shape
then I
it.
think the
So,
key
yeah.
is doing like you can't I feel like you can't leave it there as just a bunch of things that really work on their own. I think, this is where what Austin is saying comes in is like you have to be able to take a step back when it's all there and figure out how this is a story in some way, shape, or form. And I think that's for the reader.
Hmm.
Like the
Sure.
reader wants a story. These things
So,
all like eventually all become like really beautiful to me, but like they have to be presented as a story, like as something that you want to share and that you want to get other people interested in. So it's a
so
long process and it starts from like the inside out for me. So that's technique for me.
yeah,
Hmm.
it's almost reductive. You come up with
It
something and
is.
you tear away at it and you add a little here and take a little there. And um, it is, I mean, that's like verbal sculpting to me.
Hmm.
That's how I've always looked at it. But yeah, eventually shaping it into a story.
So, Austin, I'm trying to think of it from the opposite standpoint, but are your stories all moral tales? Are they conflicts with resolution that involve a moral choice, or is that too simple?
Um, One way or another, everything I've written is some sort of a moral
Hmm.
uh, choice. Yeah. Um, like I said, I write stories of good guys and bad guys, and it's a question of somebody has done something or intends to do something that is totally unacceptable, and how do we deal with that? How does this character or this group deal with that? Um, my people are, I hope, very real people. So there is always in my characters there is always a question. Is this really the way to go? How do you and it kind of comes down to how do you tell your heroes from your villains? How do you tell the good guys from the bad guys? And I think that the way you tell is the bad guys are willing to do anything to get their way. And the good guys question themselves all the time.
Uh,
That's
But
yeah.
Austin, I mean, thinking about the story I'm working on, this character will do anything to get his way, but at the same time, like he's reflecting on it, right? He has both qualities.
Okay. Well,
So
that's a that's a
I think,
well-rounded character.
yeah, I think it's a mix. I don't
But
think.
if he thinks it through and worries about it, or gives but ultimately does that thing that's not the selfish thing, then he's a good guy
Yeah, that's a good point, actually.
in my
do
universe.
do any of your characters end up doing the wrong thing? Have you written a book where it doesn't end with a morally sound choice
Um,
and then punish them?
I have written some stuff where the people that I have put in the position to be the good guys do things that they deeply regret afterwards.
Mhm.
But very often they're doing things to stop somebody doing something that's even worse.
Uh-huh.
You
So
know,
there's salvation in that.
Mhm.
if you just ask the average person on the street, "Hey, would you kill somebody?" They will gut reaction, "No." Well, what if what if they were holding a knife to your mother's
Right.
throat?
Right.
Oh, well, yeah.
Mhm. Sure.
And
Sure.
It's
if you don't
relative.
put your people in difficult situations, the story's no fun,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
The one you're talking about with the one character, he is dealing with the weight of the entire society's expectations of him.
Mhm.
That's a big boulder.
Uh-huh.
And I think I would like to read that story of how do you deal with that,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
and somewhere out there, there's real life people who are actually dealing with that
Oh, yes.
right now.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
There are people who, in their deep heart of hearts, if they had to admit it, yeah, I'd have aborted that kid.
Mhm.
You know?
Yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
who could you say that to? Nobody, or very
Exactly.
few people.
Exactly. You
Yeah.
certainly can. And least of all, your partner.
Yeah. Sure. Who did not agree with you in the first place?
Right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Moral dilemmas.
Right. Well, I then I actually admire Austin that you had the clarity to with the writing. I actually write the exact opposite way. Like I think the tagline to Without Expiration was are we bad people that do good things or good people that occasionally do bad things, And because gee, I'm sure there's saints among us, but most of us kind of fall in that in between, right? Most of us don't fall into, protagonist or antagonist. I'm the
Right.
protagonist in my story. I'm the antagonist in my teenage daughter's story. That's story, right? And it's just this rotating thing. So I always like to. I mean, a lot of a lot of the stories in that collection. Yeah, there's one with a really long title that I loved it because it was long, but I'm probably going to butcher it. But I think it was 1,000 counted and unrepentant debts. And it's a line from the story, but it's a girl that kind of she wants to make money on the cheap, and there's the single dad that she's friends with that is just struggling, but he's still trying to be a good father. And then the conflict kind of comes because they do have some relationship, but both of them are too broken in their ways to kind of put it together. And at the end, a really bad thing happens, and it's like you could go, oh, he's a bad person for what happened. And at the end of the day, he is. I'm trying not to kind of ruin it for anyone that decides that they want to read it, but he was put in the situation that he didn't kind of know the exact way out of, and kind of gets caught up and unintentionally does a really really bad thing. And I liked those stories where it's like Flannery O'Connor used to do that all the time, a short story writer, where it would be, and she was deeply religious, but she would have characters do unreligious things all the time to actually paint the picture for the reader what she was getting at, and so I think I think it goes story by story, but I think it's fun sometimes to play along with those margins. Like you can have the bad guy, quote unquote, win. And that doesn't mean you. One of the things I hate about modern, like when we look at writers, is like you'll have a writer and he'll have a character that's racist, and we go, that writer's so racist. Like, no, he might actually, or she might be making a point against racism by having the racist character. But I think too often we conflate the writer with like they're trying to make an impression on a reader, and we go, oh, that's the writer's point of view, and it's like not necessarily. The writer's trying to make a bigger point, and the characters are a point of view that they're playing around with as a technique to kind of get there.
All of this is pointing out to me again, we're talking about really big stuff, big themes, big morals, big dilemmas, and yet shrinking those and compacting the action and the space to tell the story into a short story. I mean, all of these could be great novels, but you have to take these big themes that we're talking about, or big circumstances that doesn't need to be a theme, and figure out how to put that into a very tight story that brings it home, a big message home. And
Well, I think again, that's focusing on thinking about all these stories, like focusing on the one thing. I mean, in these writers' minds, they have in the background all these like huge ideas about these themes,
Sure.
but like it's all being conveyed through the way this character like turns on a faucet or
Right.
says something to another,
Exactly right.
they
Mm-hmm.
make it so that like that's actually what's happening, but that's not actually what's happening. And
Right.
we know, like, and
Mm.
that's the key is like to be able to, yeah, as William said, like distill it or just focus in on the exact things that you need to focus on in terms of their behavior, what they're saying to each other, what you're describing, what you're seeing, that show that thing, but also convey these huge ideas about what's
And
going
that's
on.
what makes that format so unforgiving. Again, you
Uh-huh.
don't have the room to fuck around and
Right.
give it lots of nuance.
Right.
And,
That's
you
true.
Mm-hmm.
everything has to just ping. Everything has to just hit that sweet spot and
Well,
convey
that again,
big things.
that's like for me why the sculpting is so important is
Yeah.
that like I have to like every line has to sing for me
Mhm.
like um for
But
that very reason. I
it
think
has
because
to
I've read
carry a
so
lot of
much.
weight. It has to carry a lot of weight
It
too. Every
does.
word,
It
every
does.
gesture, more than in a novel where a chapter
Mm-hmm.
can, you can make that point over a big expanse of time or action.
Yeah.
Sure.
But
Well, it's like that old, they would
Yeah.
say a picture paints 1,000 words, right? And there's truth to that, right? But as a writer, you can actually paint that picture with an image that you
Mhm.
put into the story, right? And so it's like you have to, with the shorter you're writing, is you have to be better at putting those images, those things in that actually paint that 1,000 words for
Yeah.
you without you needing to write it. So like
Hmm.
there's
Exactly. Yeah.
a
Exactly.
short story I wrote, Best If Used By, that's just about expiration dates, essentially.
Mhm.
You could look at it and go, it's not about that at all, but it's just a lady putting away the groceries and sees a Best If Used By date. And then she goes through stuff, that's about loss, multiple levels of loss. And those things that are without expiration, which is actually where the title of the short story collection comes from. So you have to find those little things and be able to get the words to work, harder
Resonance.
for you. With like images are a great way to do it, especially if you can recur or contradict them. There's other ways too, not to belabor the image, but just going with the paintings, telling, saying 1,000 words, whatever it happens to be.
Everything has to have resonance. And one of the
Mhm.
tricky things, I think, when you create a character, um, is not to say they have brown hair and blue eyes and or a medium build. Well, that tells you nothing. But if you say that that person looks like they never have clean shoes, they always look like their shoes are a little dirty. What
Hmm.
does that tell you?
Yeah,
Okay, now
you know
you're
that
beginning to
person.
get somewhere. It doesn't
Yeah.
Mhm.
tell you everything, but it's informative for a small detail.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sure.
And that's the truth. I mean, certainly in literary fiction, that's one of the biggest challenges is how do you get nuance and depth quickly and without telling a great many details.
Oh, sure.
Right.
And
Or
I
how do
agree.
you describe the scene, right? Or the setting and these other things that
What
are
do you
important.
choose? Yeah.
But
It's all about what you
how do you
choose.
get it in?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's part of the reductive thing too, Jesse, I think is finding out exactly what you need to get the biggest bang for the buck, for want
Right.
of a better
Exactly.
term. I mean, you need it to resonate so that it takes on much more meaning than just itself, whether it's
Exactly.
images or
Exactly.
description. And you get that. I believe in editing by reduction. It's taking things out as much as
Right.
putting things in. What do you need? What exactly do you need? And can you get rid of the rest? And so
Exactly. And
Mhm.
I think
yeah,
it's
distilled.
not quite as stressful if you learn to just be okay with writing a lot,
Yeah,
you know? It's fine. No one's gonna see it. Well, you guys just saw it, but like nobody really is gonna see it. Um, you just write it, write, and like, oh, okay. The more you write, the more you have to work with. The
yeah,
deeper you're getting, the deeper the connection you're making to the
Yes.
material,
yep.
right? And then you can just whoosh, cross that out, cross that out. That's interesting. Let me focus on that. Like,
The
that's
lump of
fine if you give
clay.
yourself the space. Yeah, you don't have to like write those weighty lines right from the get-go. Like you
Yeah,
can't.
yeah.
Hmm.
I can't imagine what it must have been like to write, to compose in the era before typewriters.
Oh my God.
Because I mean, my approach to writing is throw it all down there and
Exactly.
then go back to the beginning and make the fixes.
Yeah.
but that's because I can delete words and,
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
move
Sure.
sentences. That sentence belongs down here.
Mm-hmm.
And, but you can do that so easily in the computer, but what must it have been like when you wrote it
Yeah.
and then you said, "Oh, no, that's the wrong phrase. Now what? You rewrite that entire page?"
Right.
Well, of
And
all of you, I'm the oldest of the four of us, probably by a good 20 years. And when I started writing fiction when I was in my early 20s, I remember literally scissors and tape. And, I don't remember that I hand wrote much,
Wow.
but it was
yeah.
typewriter before there was even correcting tape. And I remember cutting, pasting, moving paragraphs and pages, and it was a mess. It was really hard to
Wow.
do. And when
Right.
word
Sure.
processing, as it was called originally, came in, it was, oh my God, it's so much easier. So
Yeah.
it's true if you are a writer who doesn't write cleanly, and who of us does, an awful
Yeah.
lot of it is just moving, stacking, reducing, adding,
Yeah.
and good Lord. So you're right.
Yeah, I started on a little Royal Portable, and I had the tape, the white tape that you would put
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh.
over
Mm-hmm.
the words
Mm-hmm.
that you don't want.
Sure.
And that was a big deal. That was a big,
Like the what is it called? What the whiteout
yes.
back in the
Yes,
day?
yes,
Uh-huh.
I remember using whiteout.
Oh,
Oh
and
God,
yeah.
typewriters that could go back, the IBM Selectric that would actually use tape to remove a letter. Ugh,
yes,
Right.
ugh, very
it was
big deal.
magic.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But
Actually, I remember
it's
working
interesting
a
'cause
job where we had to tell people because it was a quality regulatory stuff, and we had to tell. There used to be a rule in our procedures that not to use whiteout. And I remember having to go to my boss at some point, going, "No one even knows what whiteout is anymore. Like, I don't think we can remove this. There's no whiteout in the building. No one's doing this thing."
Oh,
What were you saying,
I was going to
Justin?
say, like, it's not as though, when those writers were writing without the typewriter, they created things that were inferior. I mean, we're talking about like some of the best literature that's ever been created, like
Yes.
Sure.
Byron, Milton, Shaw, like they
yeah.
did
Yep.
it. They
Yeah.
created like exemplary works. So
Huh.
I don't know
Well,
what
I think
I
part
know
of it
Milton
might.
dictated Paradise Lost because he was blind. So he didn't even
Mm,
write it. He just dictated it.
Wow.
Someone wrote it for him.
sure.
It's
I
crazy.
believe it completely because I think part of it is that just like all that cutting and pasting we were doing, back in the day, now our attention span and things is so fragmented, just being cutted and pasted into all the time, right? I actually just made a note for myself earlier that I've always been good about not doing this, but earlier while I was writing, I found I checked my phone like 2 or 3 times, like over a fairly short pan. And I always like my family gets annoyed because I'm notorious for like losing my phone places because I just kind of forget about it. And I'm fine with that. Like I like to forget about it, but I was like, oh, I don't need like to check this phone. Like it doesn't
Right.
need. And usually what I do is I just silence it and kind of
Hmm.
put it somewhere, which also annoys my family. But I need just to like focus here, and so I think if you were of a time that didn't have so much things competing for your attention, and then also trying to brain hack you based on human psychology that's been learned over all these years, hack your brain to get you to buy this and get you to pay attention to this for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds, that, maybe it's now it takes us more editing
Mhm.
because we're being edited all the time versus back in the day with Byron and some people that there wasn't so much just attention suck, just absorption everywhere you walk. Like I joke when you walk into Beverly Hills, money just starts siphoning out of your pocket. It just like goes and you're like $3,000 like poorer by the time you've walked down the block. And I feel like attention span, that's everywhere you go. It's just that everywhere you go is just vying for your attention, not even just online, just as you drive, as you do anything. So,
You don't
You know,
think
it,
it's
and
that
maybe
they
when,
were, you don't think it's that they were actually smarter than us, do you? I wonder sometimes. Maybe they just had better brains than we did. I don't know.
seems like it,
Maybe we
honestly.
peaked. Maybe we're on the downward slide now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
seems like
I,
it.
yeah,
I really believe that they just had a whole lot less to think,
Well,
a
I
hmm
whole
think
lot
what Bill's
less to
saying,
to think about.
yeah, I think
sure.
what Bill is saying is absolutely true, that we are fighting against distraction constantly.
Sure.
And it's something we're so used to doing. I do the same thing, even when I'm writing. I often will just quick check my mail or check Facebook or whatever it is. And it's like, you don't
Oh,
need to do
all the
that.
time.
Yeah.
I'm lucky. The way I was taught to write is like, or the way I learned to write, like for my writing mentors, I sit in front of my computer for a certain amount of time every day. And if something comes out, great. If not, that's fine
Right.
too. But like, if I dedicate an hour or like an hour and 15 minutes, I'm lucky if I get like 30 really focused minutes, like honestly, because the other 30 or 45 is gonna be me like checking a work email or, you know, I'm interested in chess, like playing chess on my phone. Like, yeah, it's bad.
Right.
Um,
Well, and there's a work terminology they use for it called deep work. And it's kind of that moment like that first two, if you sit down, that first 2 hours might be the struggle. But at some point, your brain will actually kind of hit the time where it really dives really deeply into the
yeah, I
work.
think that's true.
And it's trying to find that moment. And if you can get there, and that 2 hours will be your most productive over, even if you spent 8, it's that 2 hours, whatever span, and you can actually extend it with practice. But that's why I think, because having the corporate career and then like thinking about these things with trying to manage myself, but also, employees and things is, oh, you know what? Yeah, if you can start getting rid of those distractions, it won't be that first hour, but your brain will hit a point where like, okay, now I'm perfectly in the zone.
Yeah.
It's that sports kind of that idea of zone, right? It's like you can actually hit that with whatever you're doing.
That's
Certainly
true,
with your
I think,
writing.
because it's never the first half an hour that I'm focused. It's always the latter half, always.
Right, right.
I always
Sure.
end like, wow, that was a really cool idea. Like, how did I get there? Da, da, da. But the first like 30, 45 minutes is just me like,
Yeah.
all right, what's going on? Twitter, okay. Da, da, da.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, and
maybe I'll
I
go make a
heard this.
sandwich, come back. Like,
Sure. Well, and I heard from this was a psychologist, and not talking about writing, but he had talked about like, it's actually better to end your day in the middle of something. So like for writing, if you can end in the middle of a sentence, I don't try to get so granular that I always end in the middle of a sentence per se, but it's like your brain hates unfinished business. So if you kind of leave it, your subconscious will keep thinking about it and working on it. So when you come back to it, so I always try to live like as I can. Sometimes it doesn't work out, naturally, but if I can end mid scene, mid paragraph, something, and I'll write kind of my notes for the next day from there and just leave it and let my brain just kind of pick at it. As you go about, you can get the subconscious working for you.
Yeah.
And that can be really powerful. So,
I'll have to try that.
yeah. So I did want to remember this time because, and I don't remember if I mentioned it on the email, so I can go first in case I didn't and give everyone a chance to think about it. But one of the things I wanted to do with the show is make sure we end these open bars with our toast of the night. It's just like a kudos, or if you want to give a shout out to anyone, anything.
Oh.
I think I mentioned it last one and then I forgot. And Sue was like, I had someone. And I was like, gosh, but I wanted to remember today. So I want to give a shout out, a toast, if I will. And I'm actually out of my rye whiskey here. I'll put it up to you. I'm giving you guys extra time to think about this. So, because I do recall I didn't mention it, but I want to give a happy birthday to two very special girls in my life. My daughter Michaela, who turned 19 4 days ago as a recording, and then my granddaughter Eliana, so Ellie, who is turning 4, and she'll turn 4 before this actually airs here in September. September, I want to say 8th, but I'm getting that wrong. So I may have to cut this part because I think I've gotten the date wrong. I'm going to keep it if I got the date right, but I think it's September 8th. So I want to give a toast out to them. Writers on the show, I like to mention when they mentioned to me, I might have mentioned this last one, but James Grady has his story coming out. Though I forgot to write down the name, but it was The Smoke in Our Eyes was his last book. It's a 2-part book, and they're releasing the next one as both parts, together. It has a name, and I'll try to put it on the screen for anyone watching on the YouTube box, and I'll put it in the description for anyone on the podcast versions. But has that coming out, and Stephen Hunter has a new book coming out in the Swagger series. I think this is the granddad Swagger because I think he's gone like prequel upon prequel now so that were out. But and I mean they're both fabulous writers, really gracious too. I love both of them to death. But and James put me in together contact with you, Austin. So he gets a shout out for making this relationship happen here
Yes,
and
indeed.
everything else. So
One of the great grand old writers.
absolutely, absolutely. So that is mine for today. Anyone else? I think I tried to stall and also provide content for the viewing public. Anyone ready to roll?
I'll do it.
Yep.
I want to give a shout out to Dario Chiriello, who has taught me more about the nuances of indie publishing vis-a-vis traditional publishing, and who has been a ceaseless advocate and teacher. I've learned a great deal from him, and I'm grateful for all of that guidance and inspiration. So, Dario, this is for you.
This is for you, Dario.
He is great.
Dario, who put us in contact, Diane. So we have another one, and is a super great guy, and usually would be on here with us, and hopefully next time is back with us. So, Austin, Jesse, one of you guys?
Yeah. So my neighbor, I just found out recently, my neighbor's really, really cool guy. He's an author, and he just published his first book, and is going on a book launch.
Very cool.
The book is called, it's nonfiction. He's like he's a socialist. He's an agitator, a separatist, a very interesting guy. The book is called Their End is Our Beginning: Cops, Capitalism, and Abolition.
Wow.
And his name is Brian Bean. So huge shout out to him. I know how hard it is to get a book out there and
That's
go on a tour and all that. So very exciting.
B-E-A-N? Jesse
B-E-A-N, Brian Bean. Yeah.
Brian Bean. Okay.
Yeah. Very cool guy. Very very much a nonconformist. So yeah, huge shout out to him. That's big.
Cool.
And very
cool.
exciting.
Wow.
Yeah, thank you for that.
I did have something I did remember from the last time, but it's more appropriate for this time.
Perfect. That's why I did it. That's why I forgot the last.
Oh, that's why. Okay. I wanted to give a big shout out to my good friend Stacy Woodson. She's a member of my critique group. She won the Derringer Award for her novelette,
Wow.
The Cadillac Job. The Derringer Awards, for those of you who aren't genre people, that's the one that the Short Fiction Mystery Society gives every year.
Wow.
More to the point, she was one of the editors on this anthology that I'm in.
Cool.
Oh, very cool.
Scattered, Smothered, Covered, and Chunked. Crime fiction inspired by Waffle House.
Nice. Love Waffle House.
Every story had to have a character in it who was either scattered or smothered or covered or chunked. Okay. Now, this very bizarre. Remember, I told you I can only write a short story when there's a good theme? This wacky book is nominated for the Anthony Award for Best Anthology of the Year. The Anthony Award is a literary award from the mystery writers presented at BoucherCon, which is the big world mystery conference.
Nice.
So she might get me into a story, into an award that I could never have gotten on my own. Who knows? Stacy is just one of those great writers that just can. She has the twin ability of being able to put the words together correctly, but also help you put the words together correctly. So anyway, there's my shout out.
Love it.
Very good. Very good. Awesome. Well, thanks for that, everyone. And thanks to all of you. Thanks for showing up today. Like I mentioned, I always like to pull the curtain back because I'd be the worst Oz and all of the, the Oz's history. Because I'm just like, I would just be like, it's me behind the curtain. and then go back to like talk. But we're gonna have the big cast, and then a lot of people just different reasons weren't able to make it. So I'm glad. Thank you guys for being able to show up, so we could keep this going and
My
and
pleasure.
have
Great
open
talking
bar
with you guys.
content
Really
for
well.
people.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, I love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, cheers to all
right.
of you, and have a great night.
Thank you. You
And
too.
you.
Cheers, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.